to welcome you to the District 3 Supervisor Debate. My name is Nick Ferris. I am the treasurer for the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. First off, big thank yous to the organizations of Next Village, the North Beach Business Association, North Beach Neighbors, Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association, and of course the team at the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. Without all these great organizations coming together, this simply would not have been possible. So thank you to them. Now, the format for this debate is as follows. The debate will last 75 minutes, so we'll end around 6:45. We'll start with 2-minute candidate introductions by each of the candidates. Our moderator will then ask prepared plus some audience questions. Candidates will then have 90 seconds to answer each question. And then we'll wrap up with 1-minute candidate closing remarks. Now, one thing that's important to note, candidates have 2 ways of speaking up if it's not their turn. So each candidate has a red card and a white card. They may hold this up to the camera. The red card may be used once during the debate if they'd like to speak when it's not their turn. Now, alternatively, if a candidate has been called out by another candidate and would like a chance to respond to what was said, they may raise their white card to the camera to speak. Now, rules for tonight, the candidates have previously agreed to these. There are no posters or campaign materials may be used. No props or visual aids are allowed. And lastly, just some common sense here. We trust our candidates will conduct themselves in a manner that is respectful and civil, so no interrupting of others. If the code of conduct is broken, they'll receive a warning, and if repeated, may result in removal from the debate. All right, home stretch for my intro here. Just audience Q&A. On the right-hand side of your window, there is a chat box. There you may submit questions throughout the debate. Our team will be reviewing them just to make sure it's actually a question, and we'll then publish it to the audience to see. Audience members, you then have a very important role to play here. If you see a question that you like, please upvote it. At the end, Trisha will look at the top 6 questions and select 2 of those, which seem to be the most relevant or haven't been covered. So please make sure it's applicable to all candidates. All right, thank you for allowing me to drone on here with the rules. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator this evening, Trisha Thadani. Trisha is the City Hall reporter for the Chronicle. She's been in this position for the past 3 years, covering all things City Hall, so we are very lucky to have her. She has a particular passion for covering homelessness and mental health policy. Besides that, she went to the greatest and most fun university in the world. That is, of course, Boston University, which by pure coincidence happens to be the exact same university I went to, so no bias there. But yeah, on that note, I would like to pass this over to Trisha, and let's get ready to rumble.
All right, thank you for that great introduction. So we're going to start with candidate intros, and so we're going to go alphabetically. So we're going to start with Supervisor Peskin, then we're going to Danny, and then Spencer. So Supervisor Peskin, take it away.
Thank you, Ms. Thadani, and good evening. As it turns out, if you do it by first name or last name, we still have the same order. I'm Aaron Peskin, and thank you so much to the hosting organizations for this debate, and to all of you who are here this evening. I think everybody's been waiting for this debate, and so have I. We face a starkly different world today than we did 4 years ago, and we all know that 2020 has been remarkably challenging for all of us. In 2016, we set out to make the city more livable and affordable. And indeed, we've created and preserved thousands of affordable units across the city and in District 3. We have revitalized parks from Washington Square to Willy Woo Wong. We pioneered a first-in-the-state tax on ride sharing to fund pedestrian safety, bike lanes, and Muni. And last March, we passed a tax on storefront vacancies to revitalize our neighborhood commercial districts. But all of that changed when the pandemic hit. We immediately issued a shelter-in-place order to keep the city safe. Homeless shelters were closed. Businesses were shuttered. We went into lockdown. And I've worked very closely with the mayor and other city leaders at the Emergency Operations Center to craft our response, which has appropriately been rated one of the best in the state and the nation. We immediately banned evictions of residential and commercial tenants who couldn't pay due to the coronavirus. We unanimously passed a law to shelter homeless people in hotels, which has secured housing for thousands of people. And we worked to keep our district safe, expanding testing for COVID-19 in places like Chinatown and beyond. For small businesses, we secured over $1 million in disaster relief and worked very closely with business owners to pioneer the shared spaces concept, first in North Beach and now throughout the district and the city. And we, District 3, lead the city in revitalization through shared spaces and open air dining. Step by step, we're coming back. I'm running for re-election because I believe San Francisco can keep moving forward, and I'm committed to continue making that happen. And I'm honored to be endorsed by some of the leaders we trust to guide our city and our nation through this crisis, including Mayor Breed, Speaker Pelosi, Senator Feinstein, and numerous others. I look forward to the rest of our discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Danny?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for showing up and being here. My name is Danny Sauter. I'm running for District 3 Supervisor. I'm a renter, nonprofit director, and community organizer. My background is grounded in these communities and neighborhoods of District 3. I'm the executive director of the nonprofit Neighborhood Centers Together, which supports our neighborhood and community centers, including Cameron House in Chinatown, Intel High Neighborhood Center in North Beach. I'm also the president of North Beach Neighbors, one of our neighborhood associations. And this is where I first saw the power and promise of banding together with your neighbors to get things done when City Hall drops the ball. We started a community farmers market. We started the Adopt a Street program to clean up the streets ourselves. And in the midst of COVID-19, we started an effort called North Beach Delivers, which is a free delivery service for restaurants that's now raised almost $100,000 to support struggling businesses. So I'm running and I'm here tonight because I believe this moment demands new ideas and fresh leadership. We cannot continue to vote for the same leaders and expect different results this time around. As supervisor, I will work with the community to build affordable housing and protect tenants, expand programs that work to reduce homelessness, and cut the red tape that has kept our storefronts empty. And it's this commitment and this vision that has helped our campaign earn endorsements from organizations including the Chinese American Democratic Club, Planned Parenthood of Northern California, San Francisco Renters Alliance, and the largest Democratic club in our city, the United Democratic Club. Thank you, and I look forward to a good conversation tonight.
Thank you, Danny. Now, Spencer?
Hi, I'm Spencer Simonsen. Thank you, Trisha and Nick, for getting this all together, and thank you to the organizations for helping host this. I'm running to be your next District 3 Supervisor. I have no background in the politics of San Francisco. My background has been in low-income financing, in legal aid and legal services here in San Francisco, and in senior and disability services as well. So it's a lot different than the background of pretty much all the other candidates. All the things that I've worked on, all the things that I've helped build, have focused on outcomes for our residents and put those outcomes first, above any type of politics, above any type of Band-Aid solutions. And so what the perspective that I'd like to bring to City Hall is a long-term perspective that focuses on our goals and make sure that we can reach them. As mentioned before, we're still going through the COVID crisis. And then the next few years in San Francisco, we're going to have a lot of struggles to come. We're going to need to support our small businesses. We're going to need to support our residents. We're going to need to support our unhoused and homeless individuals. And we're going to need to make sure that the resources that San Francisco has can go farther than they've ever gone before, because we're going to need to hit the same requirements with less money, with less tax basis, with less tourism money coming in. And so I think with my proven track record in these different industries, directly in the industries, helping to build solutions in all of them, I think that's critical to bring to San Francisco Hall to actually solve some of the crises on our streets rather than continue to push them down the road. So I want to see San Francisco get back on track.
Great. You had 15 seconds left.
I know. Thank you, and I hope that you would vote for me this November.
Okay, thank you guys. So moving to our first question. So as we all know, Supervisor Aaron Peskin has been in office for 3 terms, which have encompassed both good and bad economic times for the city. So Danny and Spencer, in this time, what has the supervisor not done that has led you to challenge him? Please be as specific as you can in your answer in terms of votes that he has taken that you wouldn't have, or values that he holds that you don't think are good for this city. So the way that we'll start this, so we'll go Danny, then Spencer, and then Mr. Peskin, you will get a chance to respond. So Danny, go ahead.
Of course. Well, thank you for the question. I've been compelled to run by conversations with everyday neighbors who are frustrated with the status quo, and they don't have confidence in the city, in the current leadership, to make sure that the next 4 years are better than these past 4 years, or frankly, better than these past 20 years. And you asked to be specific, so I want to highlight a specific issue where there's a real area of difference between the supervisor and myself, and that is on small businesses. I think that we need to elect leadership that understands this has been a crisis for years. In 2018, as neighbors tried to raise the alarm bells on this topic, Supervisor Peskin failed to act. He told the media that it was, quote, a very healthy situation. I knew this wasn't the case, so I worked with my neighbors to canvass 400 storefronts and produce a vacancy report before the city did. The number one thing we can do right now to support small businesses is make it easier for them to open and operate. We need to reform our current zoning. The current zoning means that it is illegal to open a bakery in North Beach, illegal to open an art gallery on Polk Street, or a pop-up anywhere in District 3. We've tried this approach, which is one of highly political approval processes, confusing language. I think we see the results that it's not working.
Okay. Spencer?
Yeah, so I kind of agree here with Danny as well. This is a long-term failure in City Hall. This is not a short-term thing that has just popped up with COVID as far as supporting our small businesses. I would add on an additional example as far as our Slow Streets program. I've heard from many business owners in my neighborhood, Nob Hill, as well as in the Polk Gulch, who are very disappointed in Aaron Peskin not bringing slow streets to these areas as quickly as possible. I think we saw certain slow streets in North Beach and other areas, but there were no immediate proposals at the same time to bring slow streets to Polk Street, as well as other streets in Nob Hill. And I think a lot of our businesses suffered from that. They're continuing to suffer. And so supporting businesses immediately is something that's necessary. I think Aaron Peskin, again, has lacked on actually building houses, making sure that we have completed navigation centers in District 3. As we've discussed in other meetings, our nav center still has not been completed in District 3. It's been years and years and years since it was first promised to be delivered. And we need, multiple facilities here in District 3. We need support for all of our residents in District 3, and we need serious support for our small businesses here moving forward and our residents moving forward as well.
Would you like to defend yourself, Supervisor?
Thank you, Mr. Donnie. I'm happy to answer some of the spurious charges, but let me start with, you said I've been through it before. You're absolutely right. I was president of the Board of Supervisors during the Great Recession in 2007 and 2008, and I'm very proud of the city's fiscal health. We continue to have very, very healthy rainy day reserves, something that did not exist when I first became the supervisor 20 years ago. We have a superlative bond rating from Standard & Poor's and Fitch and Moody, and we continue to balance our budget on time. Relative to the contention around small businesses, let me just say I was the first person to do that survey in 1999, to repeat it in 2007. I've watched as vacancies have gone up and down. That's precisely why I am the only contestant in this race who supported the vacancy tax along with the Council of District Merchants. None of my competitors actually supported that tax, and one of them actually opposed it.
And we'll get to the vacancy tax after that. Danny, you have a rebuttal card. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I'll make it quick just to speak to the vacancy tax. I think the concept of a vacancy tax has some merit, but the legislation itself was poorly written last year. And let's be clear, the vacancy tax was delayed. It will not go into effect until at least 2022, if at all. So our small businesses don't have years to wait for the city to act. As supervisor, you need to make these tough decisions and make decisions around priority. Last year, we should have been spending time making it easier to open small businesses. That's what would have made a difference immediately.
Go ahead.
I'll defer to Mr. Simonsen, who also waved a white card.
If we're going to go over
sorry.
the vacancy tax later, that's fine as well.
We are going to go over the vacancy tax later. Would you guys like to defer till then? I have a whole question around it.
No, so Mr. Donnie, I actually want to get to the contention that it is more difficult to permit a business in portions of this district than the rest of the city. And that is hogwash, with one exception, which is chain stores. Every organization in this corner of the city, Russian Hill Neighbors, Telegraph Hill Dwellers, North Beach Neighbors, the North Beach Business Association, back in the day, the North Beach Chamber of Commerce, all agreed that they did not want, and indeed I passed legislation to ban chain stores in the North Beach Neighborhood Commercial District. I am proud of that. I hope everybody else appreciates that. And that is the only thing that differentiates the North Beach Neighborhood Commercial District from our other commercial districts in the city.
So why don't we get to the vacancy tax question now, because this is a good segue. So obviously, for those who don't know, in 2019, the vacancy tax passed. It was written by Mr. Peskin as an attempt to spur landlords to lease out their storefronts faster. Danny, you've made it clear you did not support the vacancy tax. Spencer, what was your stance on the vacancy tax?
Yeah, so I did not support the vacancy tax either. I talked with several small business owners. I talked with mom and pop building owners, and they were all concerned about the impacts of the vacancy tax. They were also concerned that it wasn't, it's a broad tax, that the intent is to target a few bad actors in North Beach, and instead it applies to basically everyone. And there's impacts there beyond the target individuals in North Beach. And so I think it was just a bad piece of legislation. I asked Aaron Peskin's office before what the next steps were after the vacancy tax. There was nothing that I was told about as far as actual next steps to help San Francisco's businesses beyond just putting in place different taxes and different bans. I'll also speak to the chain ban. I think chain bans are important for places in North Beach. I think you see some difficulties in other areas of San Francisco as well that are impacted by these chain bans. We actually have food deserts because people cannot get new stores in those areas. We've had a lot of complaints from the Polk Street area where they've wanted certain supermarkets in there, and they haven't been able to get them for years. And instead, those places have remained vacant. There's been nothing there. It's been a blight on those different areas. And you just had negative outcomes from that. So again, this is just a regressive tax and regressive measures that are being put forward by Aaron Peskin. I'd like to see something positive as far as how we move forward and help those businesses.
Since this was your legislation, Supervisor, I want to ask you, now that it has been delayed due to the pandemic and the economic impacts that we've had, looking back, do you still feel like that was the best piece of legislation? And are you still looking forward to it being implemented? I believe it's delayed until 2021 at this point.
So thank you, Mr. Donnie. And let me just say that over 2/3 of the voters disagree with the two individuals that are here this evening. It required 2/3 to pass because it was a dedicated tax, and any money raised from that tax actually goes directly back to small, struggling businesses to add to what we've already done. The Legacy Business Program, where I have designated more legacy businesses than any other supervisor in San Francisco, all of them here in District 3. Cash grants to businesses that are suffering from the impacts of construction, like the Central Subway and Van Ness BRT. But it's very easy to sit in the cheap seats and have the perfect be the enemy of the good. The reality is That legislation was crafted in conjunction with the Council of District Merchants, with the North Beach Business Association, with the commission, the Small Business Commission that oversees these kinds of policies. This was truly legislation that was collaborative in nature. It was endorsed by the Democratic Party, by, I believe, every single one of my colleagues, and embraced by over 2/3 of the electorate. Yes, I'm proud of that. And we did not implement it during the midst of this pandemic, but we will be implementing it in a year. And by the way, it included safeguards wherein the Board of Supervisors, by a 2/3 majority vote, can actually tinker with it.
Spencer, then Danny.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up on that legacy business system and cash grants for the Central Subway. Here's the first issue with that is the legacy business process that we have in place is not very transparent. And a lot of the times it has to go through Aaron Peskin's office. I think that's one of the difficulties that most small businesses in San Francisco see is that there is an opaqueness and a lack of transparency to our city systems, to the steps needed. And they have to go through a single person or a single person's office. And that person is Aaron Peskin. Aaron Peskin can hold these up for whatever reason he decides he wants to hold them up for. I think another thing about the Central Subway is that these pieces of legislation, these grants, this support for these small businesses should have been done before the Central Subway started being built. We knew that these were going to have impacts, negative impacts on our businesses in Chinatown. And instead, we waited until they actually had those impacts to actually help those small businesses. And that's not what we should be doing as far as legislation.
Danny?
Yeah, and very quickly, I just want to speak to the chain store ban. The chain store ban is working. I support it. It's a red herring to bring that up. What we're talking about is small businesses. We're talking about mom and pop shops, cafes, restaurants. You can go to our website, dannyd3.com, and see exactly what is allowed and what is not allowed in District 3. You're not allowed to open a pop-up in District 3. You're not allowed to open a flexible use space in District 3, a bakery in North Beach. Those are the ridiculous things that we need to change, and that's what I'd be focused on.
So before we move on to the next topic, I just want to get you all on the record about the current chain store ban. So Supervisor Peskin, you are committed to upholding the chain store ban?
I offered it, and I have no intention of weakening it in any way.
And Danny?
Correct, it's working.
Ban? Okay, and Spencer?
Yeah, so I would say that, again, for a lot of these historic neighborhoods, it's important to have a chain store ban like North Beach. But I also believe that we have other neighborhoods that have been asking to have these vacant spots filled by certain stores so that they can continue to shop in their districts and continue to get their groceries. And instead of filling them, we've left them vacant. And I think that is a real concern that we've had spaces, on Polk Street that have remained vacant for years. We have Big Apple. There was another, I believe, an REI store up on Polk Street. They're all still vacant. And there's been several proposals to put stores there that the community has asked for, and they keep getting turned down, or they have to jump through a bunch of hoops. And so I think that is a concern.
So is that a yes or a no if you would uphold?
I would say I partially support it. I think the idea behind it is okay. I think as far as the actual legislation and what the impacts are, I'm unhappy with those.
But you would be open to the idea of loosening?
I would be open to reforming it and reviewing it, yeah.
And Mr. Dunn, if I may say, the way this legislation works is it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Chain stores are permissible as of right in the downtown. They require conditional use on Polk Street. They're banned in North Beach. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution. When a supervisor like myself listens to the different concerns and needs of particular areas of the district and the city, it has different applicability. In North Beach, everybody wanted it banned because, as Mr. Simonsen said, there was an old world feeling and everybody wanted to preserve that and not have it be anywhere corporate USA, very different from the downtown. So there are some places where they should be banned and some places where they should be permitted as of right and some places where they should have neighborhood involvement, which is the conditional use process.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to homelessness. So homelessness in San Francisco has clearly only become worse since the pandemic began, as more people are pushed toward poverty and services have been disrupted. It's obviously a citywide issue, but it is still very prominent in District 3, as you all know, on Broadway Street, Washington Square Park, etc. Many people don't feel safe in the city, especially with a lot of the open air drug use that we see. As supervisor, how would you change the city's current approach? And please don't spend your allotted time telling us how bad the crisis is, because we already know that. Please give us specifics in terms of how you would either redirect current funding, or you would increase or decrease fundings in a certain way, specific numbers of shelter beds that you would want to see, how many more case managers, social workers, etc. And obviously, if Spencer and Danny, you can tell me what you would do. Supervisor Peskin, you can use this time to tell us what you have done and what you would continue to do. So this question will go Spencer, Aaron, Danny. So Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of reasons we're having and we've struggled with homelessness in San Francisco. I think one of the major reasons is housing, clearly, and updating the zoning laws as far as housing in San Francisco. I think it's going to be important. I think being able to build, being able to use some of the spaces that we currently have, whether it's in FIDE or in other areas, to actually create housing, not necessarily with major construction projects, but actually reuse some of the buildings that we have vacant now and that are going to be, we should anticipate being vacant in the near future due to this work from home crisis around COVID. So I think that's going to be important. That's also going to help support our small businesses in those areas as well, and not let them go under. As far as specific things, NAV centers. We need NAV centers in a lot of the districts in San Francisco. We need them in District 3. We've been waiting years and years and years and years to have one NAV center here in District 3. We have a transitional age youth center. That's just that's the minimum, the bare minimum we should be doing. We need to be having, far more than one NAV center. We need to be having 3, 4 NAV centers to support individuals in San Francisco. We need to do a better job of redirecting funds, as you mentioned, potentially from SFPD into services to help those experiencing homelessness, whether that be drug rehabilitation, whether that be other homelessness services, finding housing for those individuals as well. So that's kind of the full cycle of what we need to do. It's not just one thing, it's a bunch of things.
Okay, who is next? Supervisor?
Thank you, Mr. Donnie. So I'm very proud of the work, and it is true. It took quite a long time. I believe I am the only person running in this race who supported a navigation center in District 3. Mr. Donnie, you were on the Chronicle interview where Mr. Sauter and I discussed the fact that he and his organization did not support a new navigation center, which was first planned for Broadway and later on for the Northeast Waterfront. But I finally did win approval and secured funding for a new navigation center to get kids off of our street and into a shelter, the first youth navigation center, which is almost finally built and will be open in November or December at 888 Post Street. My record is very clear. Every single former freeway parcel at Broadway and Sampson, Broadway and Battery, now at 88 Broadway and 735 Davis have been turned into affordable housing. But equally importantly, I've worked to make sure that bad actors like the Academy of Art are held accountable. We recently settled litigation that I asked City Attorney Herrera to build, wherein we secured $58 million in funding for affordable housing from the Academy of Art after their 2 decades of illegal conversions of rent-controlled housing, and restored 72 rent-controlled homes. And as was published in the Chronicle the other day, I'm very proud of the fact that we've been able to access Home Key Construction for the acquisition of 232 units on Lower Polk. I can go on about this for a long time, but I see the stop sign.
You're out of time. Okay, so I saw Spencer, in regards to Supervisor Peskin saying that he was the only candidate in this race to support a navigation center in District 3. Spencer, I saw your white card first, and then we'll go to Danny.
Yeah, so I just want to address that. That's just patently false. That's a lie. I have never said that I have opposed any navigation center. I don't know what Aaron Peskin is talking about. I've always supported building every navigation center possible in District 3. I've told the people who've supported me that, it's listed online. I've told multiple people that in the neighborhood. So I don't know where Aaron Peskin keeps getting this information from, but I can tell you that it's blatantly false. I support all navigation centers, and I support bringing in many new services to District 3. I think it's critically important to do that. I've worked directly with homelessness services and homelessness nonprofits in our district. So I think the idea that I am opposed to nav centers is just completely wrong, and it's just a lie.
Danny?
Yes, I support navigation centers as well. This is something that I've been really eager to come to District 3. It's a big piece of how we're going to solve this crisis. I've gone on navigation center tours myself. I've hosted forums, in fact, at the Italian at the Italian Community Services to make sure that we educate our neighbors on navigation centers. So navigation centers are promising. They should be opened, and I wish we had done it sooner. And then when you're ready, Trisha, I'd like to give my response on homelessness in general.
Oh, yes, you should do that. Before we get to Supervisor Peskin's white card, hold that thought. Danny, I'd like to give you a chance to respond.
Thank you. And I'm glad you asked it, and we're talking about it so early on, because homelessness is up 41% in District 3 since 2015. We know programs that work, and we need to expand them. We need a housing first solution to homelessness. This has worked in Houston, and I bring up Houston because just a few years ago, Houston had the same level of homelessness that we have in San Francisco now, about 8,000 individuals who sleep on our streets each night. In contrast, here in District 3, we've completed 0 units of housing for formerly homeless individuals since 2015. We also need to expand our workforce development program. This is important because the number one reason for homelessness is job loss. So I would work to expand programs that work, like the Downtown Streets team that works. I'd like to see that expanded into neighborhoods like Nob Hill so that we can put individuals back up on their feet with work, and we can beautify our neighborhoods. But we also need to do the really difficult work for those who are most impacted by this crisis. That means more mental health beds. That means expanded drug rehabilitation. The facts are that 60% of our chronically homeless population is either ailed by addiction to drugs or alcohol. So we need to do that really difficult work if we're going to make progress. And as we're doing more of this, as we're seeing expanded funds for homelessness, that's promising, that's exciting, but there needs to be oversight and accountability attached to that. Just last month, there was a report auditing HSH, our spending. It found that there were not consistent performance metrics for nonprofit providers. We give over $100 million across 59 contracts to those organizations, and we need accountability to make sure they're doing good work and the really important work that we should support.
Okay, and Mr. Peskin, you had a white card up while Danny was speaking initially. Do you want to respond and just repeat what you're responding to?
So I'm responding to the contention that either one of the other individuals in this race supported or actively supported a navigation center, whether in the Lower Polk area or my first attempts in the northeast corner of District 3. The answer is we had numerous community meetings. There was no testimony by the president of the North Beach Neighbors. As a matter of fact, there was a letter that even after I held a community meeting with 200 people that said they needed more information, even after my staff and the Department of Homelessness arranged visits to our existing navigation centers. I don't, and with all due respect, remember seeing Mr. Simonsen at any of the numerous meetings that we held in the Lower Polk area, which I am thankful to the community who ultimately embraced the location of that navigation center, which I'm not saying is without controversy, but the reality is I put my money where my mouth is.
Okay. Before I move on to the next question, just to get you both on the record, we're out of time for this question, but just to get you both on the record about 888 Post, which is where the navigation center that has been proposed is going up in the next few months, says Supervisor Peskin. Yes or no, did you or did you not support that project. Spencer, yes or no?
Yes.
And Danny, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so next question. Following the historic protest for Black Lives Matter, the Board of Supervisors passed a budget yesterday that took $120 million from the police department and sheriff's office and invested its resources for the Black community, like academic, health, and wellness programs. Was that enough? And do you want to see more or less police officers in District 3? And I've totally lost track of the order, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be Danny, Spencer, Aaron. That's what we're going to do.
Sure. Thank you. So I think yesterday was a good first step. What we've been asking for, what we've been marching in the streets for, is the concept of budget justice. The fact that over the last 5 years, our police department's budget has grown by almost $200 million, but yet our mental health services budget has grown by just $32 million. Or by the bizarre fact that our police force unit is funded to the tune of $2 million, yet our Office of Racial Equity is funded at under $1 million a year. That's what we've been demanding. That's what we've been marching for. I believe that yesterday was a good first step towards that. But this has to be a beginning. It has to be a first step towards reforming our police, in particular, reforming our police response. Our response needs to shift from one of law enforcement in so many cases to one of social workers and mental health experts. Those are the actual outreach methods that work. They work to connect individuals experiencing homelessness to services much better than law enforcement ever can. And so that would be my priority.
Okay, and then the next part to that question, would you want to see more or less? Just to be clear, would you want to see more or less officers in District 3?
I would not support expanding our police department at all right now. This is a question of making sure that police are equal, or excuse me, that police mean safety. And right now we have to accept the fact that to many people in our community, more police is not more safety. So I would not support adding more police at this moment, no.
Okay. Spencer.
Yeah, I would agree with Danny here as far as it being a good first step. You know, SFPD's budget is huge. I think there's a lot of problems with the SFPD budget being so large. You can look into kind of the top people being paid by City Hall, city employees, the top 100 individuals in San Francisco, and I hope everyone's outraged about this. The top 100 employees get paid $40 million. They got $40 million in total benefits last year. The top 2 individuals in that category were paid at nearly $800,000 in individual benefits, and those were SFPD officers. So I think everyone should be outraged about that nearly $2 million is going to just 2 people who work in San Francisco. I think as far as seeing more police officers, we definitely need to do analysis. I wouldn't upfront just support more police officers. I think there are neighborhoods that want to see safety as far as ensuring that their safety is met. I think that doesn't necessarily need to be done by police officers. It can be done by peace officers and other individuals who are part of the community. And so we need to figure out how to best balance the budget to make sure that we are getting the best outcomes and that we're holding SFPD as well as other services accountable and responsible for the outcomes that we're seeing in city at the city level. And I don't think we are. And I think that's in relation to the POA as well and their impact in San Francisco.
So is that a no to wanting to see more police officers in District 3?
I would say right now it would be a no. I might want to see them moved around and used more effectively in our district. Okay.
Before we move on to the supervisor, I just want to put a reminder in for all of our audience members that you can put questions into the chat. We should have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions toward the end. And if you see a question that you like, be sure to upvote it, and then we'll go from there. Supervisor, question on the budget. Since you were part of that budget, do you think that what you and your colleagues passed was enough? And would you like to see more police officers in District 3? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Tricia. And let me just start with some facts, which is Central Station Company A, which covers most of the supervisorial district number 3 that I represent, now has actually more full-time equivalent sworn officers than it ever has in the entire history of the city and county of San Francisco. And remember, this is the city's densest district. It is ground zero for tourism. It has all of downtown with the office buildings and Union Square. And I actually think that the staffing level is appropriate. Having said that, having an actual scientific analysis, and I agree with my competitors on this, is absolutely the right way of going. And that is exactly what Proposition E, sponsored by the President of the Board of Supervisors, Norman Yee, does on this ballot, rather than the arbitrary number that is set forth by the voters decades ago of 1,971 full sworn officers. But let me also agree with Mr. Sauter, which is this is an area that is evolving before our very eyes. And as the son of two mental health professionals, my mother ran the East Oakland Youth and Family Center. I absolutely agree that having social workers and demilitarizing our streets is the better way of proceeding, but we've got to do it smart, and we've got to do it with a lot of community involvement. And we also have to start recruiting Black businesses to the northeast corner of San Francisco, which I'm actively doing.
Right. Supervisor, I just want to get you to respond specifically to my question. So the 120 million that you and your colleagues passed, do you think that was enough? Would you have liked to see more taken from the police department?
Let me reiterate. I think that was a very good first step, and it comes with many other things in addition to reprogramming money. We have to put our actions where our words are, and that's precisely why I'm working actively to recruit Black businesses to Fisherman's Wharf and the Embarcadero Center. But I think it's a very, very good first step. The board was in lockstep with the mayor on that, and I support it.
Next question. Would you support closing streets and areas? We talked about slow streets earlier, but getting to that, again, would you support closing streets in areas like North Beach and Chinatown to allow for more social distancing, understanding that this will cause, you'll take away parking spots, it'll cause traffic congestion and other parts of the district. But would you support this, yes or no? And if you would support it, what specific streets would you like to see closed down? We're going to go the supervisor, then Spencer, then Danny.
Yes, Tricia, and I have. We have done that. We actually just celebrated, I called it the first ribbon cutting for a closing rather than an opening on one of the alleys on Lower Polk Street. And I've been pushing that for all sorts of spots. The 1700 block of Powell Street near Washington Square, having those discussions with the Fisherman's Wharf merchants about Jefferson Street along the waterfront. We are doing that now on weekends on Grant Avenue in Chinatown with the support of the Merchants Associations, plural, and the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, and are looking at expanding that. We're looking at Leavesdorf Alley in the downtown. And in all of these cases, it's really about the community coming together. And it should not be a top-down thing where the supervisor dictates this. It should really be the community getting together and deciding what's right for that particular community. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. But as we saw in shared spaces, we have removed hundreds and hundreds of parking spots so that restaurants can survive and thrive during the pandemic. And I think that's something that's here to stay, that was pioneered in North Beach and then went to the Mission, and everybody is clamoring for it. And I am not scared of emulating it anywhere and everywhere that people embrace it.
Spencer?
Yeah, so I would absolutely support expanding slow streets, not only during COVID, but post-COVID as well. I think it's important to have a pedestrian, bicycle, public transit first city and communities and neighborhoods here in San Francisco. You know, I don't have a car. I take public transit, I walk, I bike, I do those things. And so I think that's critical not only for during COVID to allow restaurants to expand out and have the room necessary to stay in business and not only survive but thrive, but I think it's going to be critical after COVID as well. And I've told, there's several small business owners that have talked to me that just say, hey, we want to have even slower, not necessarily closed streets, but reduced speed in San Francisco as well, to reduce potential road deaths. We've seen a continued trend of increased people getting hit by cars and being injured or killed on our streets. And that's something we have Vision Zero for, but it hasn't done a very good job. And so I think being able to do those things, being able to do all walks, being able to reduce the city speed limit, and I think that's critical for our city. I'd like to see some streets in my neighborhood as well, not just in North Beach. I'd like to see some streets in Nob Hill. I'd like to see some streets near the Polk Street area or in Russian Hill that would be closed down as well for our neighbors to get out and about and meet people in their neighborhood.
Danny?
Yes, absolutely. I support this. Frankly, I wish we had been doing this years ago, and I hope we do it years into the future. I think we're seeing right now it's what businesses need. It's their fighting chance to keep going on. But I want to make sure that it's not just shared spaces. I want to make sure it's not that you need to, the price of admission to some open space is a burrito or having a slice of pizza. I want to make sure that we're using these streets and this open space for more than just dining and for our businesses. I'm thinking about the slow streets concept, which has worked so well in so many other districts, but it took over 100 days for us to have our first permanent slow street in District 3. We started a petition in the spring to call for a network of slow streets to be available within 5 minutes of anyone in District 3. And I think that's something we still need to push for. What we've started shows us the promise of opening streets back up to people and what can happen, really the beauty that can emerge from our neighborhoods when people get together and take some of that space back. And so we would absolutely continue to focus on expanding that.
Okay. And getting back to housing, which we also touched on earlier, but Mayor London Breed wanted to place a measure on the November ballot this year that would cut a lot of the red tape involved in approving new housing developments for those that are either 100% affordable or market rate developments that exceed their affordability requirements. And in short, it would make building housing that already meets the zoning requirements just easier to build. But to do so, the mayor would, this measure would eliminate some of the public's ability to have input into a certain project that's going to be built, but it would shave down the time significantly. This measure, it failed to get enough votes from the board in 2019 to go on the ballot. And then this year, the mayor wanted to try again, but she said COVID-19 kept her from being able to get the required signatures. But she has vowed to try again. So I'm going to start with Supervisor Peskin. And if you could tell us, how did you vote on this measure in 2019, and how do you feel about it now? And for the candidates, what is your stance on a measure like this? So starting with the supervisor.
Right. So let me just say that I have led or been a lead co-sponsor on virtually every housing measure since my return to office in 2015, including 2019's upzoning measure for affordable and educator housing on public sites citywide, which was Proposition E. And one of my first efforts right when I got back into office was to author the law allowing for accessory dwelling units across the city. And I was also, with Supervisor Jane Kim, the author of the ballot measure that vastly increased the amount of on-site affordable housing required in new market rate projects. Let me say this about that. The fight that the board and the mayor had was not about streamlining. It was about the fact that that measure would have actually increased the area median income requirements. And I have been very consistent that 120% of area median income, which is over $100,000 for a single person and over $150,000 for a family of four, is not something that I want to mess with. I have voted for every 100% affordable housing streamlining, first brought by Supervisor Wiener, subsequently brought by Supervisor Tang, Home SF, but I am not interested in streamlining market rate housing.
Specific to my question where I mentioned, and this is still for the supervisor, where I'd mentioned that part of this proposal would eliminate some of the public's ability to provide input into projects, particularly like a special review at the Planning Commission. What is your stance on that part of the measure specifically about the public's ability to have input in these projects, which does extend the time that it takes to get them approved?
So first, let's be clear, Ms. Thadani, there are tens of thousands of units in the pipeline that are fully entitled, that have been through the planning process, that are ready to be built right now. And public involvement in the future of people's communities and neighborhoods is very, very important. And I don't think we should get rid of that. And the reality is only a handful of projects are appealed to the Planning Commission, and only a handful of those to the Board of Supervisors. And I think that it is vital to a functioning democratic society that neighbors and neighborhood organizations like the North Beach Neighbors and the Telegraph Hill Dwellers have an ability to be a part of the process. And I think shutting them out will lead to a terrible backlash, and I don't support it.
Danny?
I supported Mayor Breed's measure, or hopeful measure, I should say, and really the idea behind it, which is we have a housing crisis and we need to start acting like we have a housing crisis. I think we've seen the alternative. It's crushing rents here in San Francisco. It's pushing housing into suburbs that then clog our clog our roads, and even worse now, pushing development into wildfire land. 45% of California's development since 1990 has been built on wildfire-prone land. So that's what we can continue to do, or we can get behind the idea and the promise that San Francisco should be open to more neighbors. It should be available as a more dense place to live. I think we see that in District 3. We see the beauty of neighbors and density. And what this bill would have done is ask for the rest of San Francisco to do a little bit more of that, to make progress on the fact that we have to end exclusionary zoning, the ugly history of exclusionary zoning in San Francisco, the fact that it is illegal to build apartment buildings in 70% of the city. This was a step towards that.
Okay, and then specific to the part about community input, what do you think of that provision of the ballot measure where it would sort of shave off that time?
Well, I mean, look, I'm the president of a neighborhood association. This is one of our major roles in the community, is to look at projects, hold individuals accountable. And I looked at that and I felt comfortable with the changes. I think there's room for community input, but there's also the fact that a lot of our processes, whether it be CEQA or whether it be discretionary review, have been weaponized, and they've been taken over by one or two individuals who have a big pocketbook and aren't necessarily reflective of the true community interests. So we do have to have community input, but it's not about CEQA. It's not about DR.
Spencer?
Yeah, so I'm definitely in favor of any legislation that makes our permitting process more transparent, whether that be for building housing or for small businesses. I think one of the complaints we constantly hear is the lack of transparency in these permitting processes through City Hall. I think there's also a real struggle there. You know, there's a place that closed down a few years ago across the street from me called Nob Hill Theater. It's a classic gay theater here in San Francisco, and they are trying to build on top of that theater. And one of the things that we heard just from the building owner there was that they wanted to add more units, but they didn't do it because they were hesitant of conditional permitting here in San Francisco and the hoops that they would have to jump through. So we're losing housing, we're losing the ability to have this housing because of all the hoops that have to be jumped through. I think community input is always important. I mean, people want to have input in their neighborhoods, but as Danny alluded to, there are some problems with that, where you have certain one or two individuals who can come up, who can scream the loudest, and who can get some of these housing projects and important projects that we need for the people who are suffering on our streets, and they can stop them just by screaming the loudest. I think that's not a democracy. That's not letting everyone have their viewpoints. That's not bringing in all sides. That's very one-sided. It limits San Francisco, and it really hurts our communities in the long run.
So this is a good segue into one audience question that I just saw. So I'm going to move to that now. There's one audience question. So one audience member asked the question of how much input should the public or should the community have on navigation centers that are proposed for a certain area. We can go, I've totally lost track of this order, but we could do Danny, Spencer, Supervisor Peskin.
Well, I think whether it's navigation centers or any of the other things we've talked about tonight, there should be community input, but I want us to be really clear about what that means and really how that's formatted. This is so important and vital to our campaign that in March we put out an Open Up City Hall plan. You can look at it on our website. And it's the simple idea that right now we've made it too hard, too difficult, and too opaque to get involved in your city. And so we put forward ideas in that on equalizing things, making sure that we could, this was before the pandemic, but that we could do, we could accept public comment virtually. Why is that important? Because otherwise we're only listening to the voices that have the time and the luxury to go down to City Hall on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon and sit in a room for 5 hours to get a 2-minute comment in. We need to democratize and equalize this. Otherwise, we're going to listen to the loudest voices. We're going to listen to, frankly, and this has been proven by studies, the wealthiest, whitest voices. So we need to change that.
Okay. Spencer? No, Supervisor, sorry. Supervisor Peskin?
Thank you. So I'm not scared of public comment. I think that the public should be able to comment on a navigation center. As a matter of fact, the Navigation Center at 888 Post went to the Planning Commission, went to the Board of Supervisors. We listened to what the public had to say. As a matter of fact, we made adjustments to that project because the people of San Francisco and this district are very smart and they're very engaged. And they actually gave us ideas about things that we were not thinking about. And we actually changed part of the design of that project based on what we heard from the community. That's why community input is so important. Does that mean that it might be messy? Yes, it might be messy. Will it take a little bit longer? It might take a little bit longer. Is it worth it? I think so. That's what makes democracy the greatest system that we have. And these things don't drag on for years and years. Yes, it adds a little bit of time to the process, but in the end, justice is served. When we got a spurious appeal on slow streets, the Board of Supervisors rejected that unanimously. But yes, that's the process, and I'm all for it. It's called due process. It's what makes San Francisco and America great.
Spencer?
Yeah, I'd absolutely say that we do need community input. It's extremely important that people have the ability to voice their opinions and what they want to see in their communities to their elected leaders and to people who are planning these projects. I think one of the things that's critical that we haven't done a good job at is educating people about the homelessness issue here in San Francisco and what that means and who experiences homelessness, and just letting them know that these people are just like everyone else. These people are their fathers, their mothers, their brothers, their sisters, their aunts and uncles. And I will note, as far as Aaron Peskin says, yes, we live in a democracy. Yes, it's important to go through all these steps. Yes, they might be more lengthy, but also it's critically important that we focus on this because this is not just about making sure we're going through the motions. We have had hundreds of individuals die every year on our streets who are homeless. And so for every minute that we wait longer, for every second that we wait longer, that's a life, that's someone dying. And it's critically important that we solve these issues, not tomorrow, not today, but 10 years ago. We should have been focusing on this. And so I don't want to see any more lives lost to this. I don't want to see any more of our residents dying homeless on the street. I think it's a travesty that we're having issues like this in San Francisco, even after 20 years of Aaron Peskin. And I will also add that I was at the 888 Post public community input several times. So I just want to add that as well.
Danny, you had a white card.
Thank you. I just want to speak quickly to a specific area that I think is really broken and I would pursue reform around. And that is how San Francisco treats its CEQA process. This has been written about in the past week by the Chronicle, actually, itself. CEQA is a well-meaning environmental regulation that was passed in the Ronald Reagan days. And it's time for reform. This is the process right now that is slowing down our emergency response, where we have pop-up food pantries, slow streets, COVID testing sites on closed streets that have now been threatened because of CEQA. So, that's an example of a real regulation, a real feedback loop that is broken. And so I'd spend my time fixing those problems instead of defending them.
Does anyone want to respond to that? You brought up CEQA. So
the only thing I will say is, Ms. Thadani, together with Supervisors Weiner and Kim, I actually helped rewrite Administrative Code Provision 31 that actually streamlined the appeal process under CEQA, which is a state law. San Francisco's been at the forefront of having rational CEQA laws and rational CEQA process. So we've been there and done that.
All right, next audience question. So this was the top voted question. Why does it take a conditional use to open a business in District 3? Why is it so much harder to open a business in District 3 than anywhere else in the city? And then the only thing I'll add to that question is, please tell us what you will do to fix that. We'll go Spencer, Danny, Aaron.
Yeah, so as far as the conditional uses, I think we do have a major issue with that permitting process. I think for anything outside of what the area is being used for as far as new businesses, so say you want to put in a small cafe or you want to put in a restaurant or anything, it does require a lot of hoop jumping for those permits. I think it's also again, it goes back to what I talked about earlier as far as the transparency in the permitting process. I think we need to increase that transparency. The permitting process needs to be 100% transparent. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked with small business owners in D3 who said, I put in this permit, I spent $10,000, trying to get this permit, going through all the processes. I had to hire someone because it's such a difficult permitting process. So we've created this additional area of this third party who goes through and walks these business owners through this permitting process. And then in the end, their permit gets denied and they have no idea why. They don't know what the next steps are. And so I think it all comes back to the transparency in our permitting process is lacking. It's very opaque. As we know, opaque processes, especially at City Hall, lead to corruption and lead to issues where there's a lot of back doors being taken. And so as far as the permitting process, again, we need to open that up to be more broad. We need to have pop-up shops that are allowed without having to go through these conditional use permitting changes as well.
Okay. Danny?
Yeah, well, if it's conditional use for something like a gas station or a massive project, of course that makes sense. But when we talk about a conditional use, I want to be really specific about what that means and what that puts a potential business owner through. There was an analysis last year that found that a conditional use on average adds 11 months to a project. This is 11 months on average that you're paying rent, that you're paying lawyers to get this project through. And that's if it actually gets through. The conditional use process gets highly political, and that needs to change. We referenced this at the beginning of the conversation, but I would invite you to go to our website, dannyd3.com, where we have an article that shows line by line all of the possible things you might want to open in District 3, whether that's on Polk Street, Nob Hill, or in Chinatown, and shows you how many of those are either explicitly banned or they require conditional use. That conditional use process is broken. It needs to be required a lot less often.
Just to get you to be a little more specific, what would you do? You're saying it's broken, but what would you do to fix it?
Absolutely. So on conditional uses, we would look at all the business types that it was required for, and we would take a look and say, okay, should you actually really need a conditional use to open a restaurant on Polk Street? We would then strike conditional use requirements where necessary, and we'd reform the conditional use process so that the rest of the projects that still should go through conditional use can do so with a measure of speed and not 11 months like the current process.
Supervisor?
Thank you. Maybe Mr. Sauter and I are not too far apart on this issue. Fundamentally, conditional use is very important for just the kind of uses that are not neighborhood serving, that do not preserve the balance and the rich diversity of businesses in a neighborhood, which is precisely why, for instance, commercial financial institutions need conditional use in the Polk Street corridor and in the North Beach neighborhood commercial district, because it's fundamentally a deadening ground floor use that is discouraged. But all forms of bona fide neighborhood serving businesses, whether it's the shoe store or the hardware store, are permitted as of right and don't require a conditional use permit at all. And then there are a handful of things like formula retail that do require conditional use in some parts of the city, like Polk Street and Cow Hollow, but are banned in North Beach. But I actually agree that the conditional use process did used to take too long. And that is why I passed the CU sooner, CU, conditional use, CU sooner, sorry, that's kind of cute, legislation that streamlined conditional use authorizations for small business, that was supported by the Small Business Commission, that was supported by the Council of District Merchants, and also automatically refunds any permit fees if there are any delays in the processing of these permits, which now all appear on the consent calendar of the San Francisco Planning Commission. So I've been there and respectfully done that too.
Danny?
I just want to mention a few specific uses again, because with all due respect, Supervisor Peskin, that example of a commercial financial place of business, that's not representative of what people are frustrated by. That's not representative of what we're fighting for to add to our neighborhoods. We're talking about things like job training centers and the fact that those require conditional use in Lower Nob Hill. And the real terrible irony of that is that that is one of our highest unemployment neighborhoods. Those are the things that we should be adding. It's also not even possible to open a pop-up in District 3 or a flexible use space. The idea of combining two uses under one roof, if you want to open a bookstore and a coffee shop together, those are the types of businesses that are actually going to be feasible in this difficult economic environment. And they're not possible in District 3. They're illegal because of a vote that Supervisor Peskin took last year to carve District 3 out of that bill.
So I don't want to quibble, Ms. Thadani, but as somebody who voted for Supervisor Ronan's legislation on pop-ups, which is a relatively new thing, on social services, which Mr. Sauter just spoke to, that legislation has been passed, and I've been there and done that too.
Spencer, would you like to add anything before I move on to the next question?
Nope.
Okay. So this will be our last question. This is also an audience question. Why are there no or almost no protected bike lanes in District 3? What will you do to improve that? We can go Spencer, Danny, Aaron.
Yeah, so again, I think this, we need to have a clear focus on pedestrian, bike, and public transit first communities here in San Francisco and in District 3. I guess the biggest bike areas we've had along the Embarcadero took a long time to get completed. We don't have any specific areas that are protected bike lanes. I think that's going to be important. We definitely need to expand that program. It needs to be expanded into other neighborhoods in District 3 as well. And I think especially with COVID-19, we're going to see more people who are not necessarily going to want to be taking public transit, but will be more interested in biking or walking. So I think this all combines with our slow streets programs, as well as closing certain streets and allowing businesses. What I see is a more vibrant community where we do have a lot of protected bike lanes, where we have no rights on red areas, where we have slower speed limits in San Francisco to allow people to enjoy their city, to get out, to exercise, to go biking, to visit their friends, to go to their favorite restaurants that may be operating in these little parklets on the streets. And so I think it is absolutely critical that we start to expand more protected bike lanes, also ensuring that our businesses are able to continue to operate with that. So I think it's important to do the balance there.
Danny?
Well, you asked why we don't have them, and the answer is simple. We haven't had the political leadership to build them. And it's really disappointing that we don't have any protected bike lanes in District 3. It makes things more dangerous. It's terrible for the environment when we don't support that mode of transit. And other districts have figured out how to do this. District 5 has a rich network. District 6 has made incredible progress in the last 5 or 10 years. And so that's one of our top priorities if elected District 3 supervisor. And it's part of why we earned the sole endorsement from the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. I think especially right now, there was a survey or an article that I saw today that biking was up 40% nationwide. And that's the sort of mode of transit that we need to promote. And I'll just speak to something that biking often gets a flack for. It gets a flack for the fact that it's just something for the young. And I will submit that is the case too often. But if we are to make San Francisco streets safe, we'll see everyone using bike lanes. We'll see everyone using transit, just as the rest of the country has caught on to.
Supervisor?
Thank you, Mr. Downey. So first of all, I want to look at this holistically. District 3 has the highest number of people who walk to work. It has the highest amount of community ridership. Pedestrian safety is part and parcel of this. But I was an early adopter of the first comprehensive bike plan and bike network plan in San Francisco. I was the person who actually raised a bunch of money to remove the fire hydrants from the Broadway tunnel so bicycles could go through the Broadway tunnel, something that I'm very proud of. And we have indeed, despite a lot of pushback from a multi-jurisdictional area that is shared by the port and the city of San Francisco, one protected bike lanes and segments of bike lanes, particularly along the southbound Embarcadero, including at Embarcadero and Broadway, Embarcadero and Sansom. And these are some of the safest stretches of bike lanes in the entire city. But yes, we have more work to do, and we're doing that on Sansom, we're doing that on Battery, and most recently I successfully fought for the MTA to include the entire Embarcadero on its list of quick build bike lane projects. And I've advocated for the MTA for new bike lanes along Bush Street, heading east-west, on Kearny, heading north-south, on North Point, and on Bay Streets. So we're working on it, and there's a lot more to do throughout the city and county of San Francisco.
And just one last question for the supervisor, since you are the one in office and you're saying there are ones that are, in the pipeline, what is the timeline that District 3 residents should expect to see more bike lanes in?
So you've seen the Embarcadero improvements roll out in real time over the last year. The quick build projects are on the calendar for 2021. On the pedestrian improvement side, not only did we get $30 million of funding for bike lanes and pedestrian safety improvements through the passage of the TNC tax, but we have installed pedestrian safety improvements along Columbus Avenue, along Broadway, scramble signals at every intersection on Stockton Street in Chinatown, now on Kearny Street near Portsmouth Square, and our pedestrian safety work continues to go on.
All right. So that concludes our questions. Danny, make it quick because we got to get.
Yeah, I think it's about results. It's about the fact that 30 people died on our streets last year, and that we've had plans and budget for years, and we haven't built protected bike lanes. That was what the original question was about. So I want us to stay focused on that. I want us to realize that we don't have protected bike lanes in District 3.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, so closing statements. You have 2 minutes, so we're going to go with the supervisor, Danny, and then Spencer.
Thank you, Tricia. And I want to again thank the hosts and particularly everybody who is watching this evening. Do not forget to vote on November 3rd. And I believe this is really a time for unity, not divisiveness. We all have to come together. Partisan bickering is something that we expect from Washington, but not San Francisco. And that's why I'm really proud to be supported in this campaign by so many folks from every corner of our diverse city and this diverse district. That includes Mayor Breed and all 10 of my colleagues on the board. It includes Speaker Pelosi, Senator Feinstein, Assembly Members Chu and Ting. It includes representatives from virtually every unit of labor, from the firefighters to the nurses, the San Francisco Labor Council, and the Building and Construction Trades Council. It includes the San Francisco Democratic Party, the Sierra Club, the Tenants Union, the Latino Democratic Club, and yes, Planned Parenthood, and both the Harvey Milk and Alice B. Toklas LGBTQ Democratic clubs. To bring this city back, we all have to work together, and that is my commitment, That is what I have done. And if you reelect me, that's exactly what I'll continue to do. Thank you and good evening.
Kenny?
Thank you, and thanks for spending the evening with us. I really enjoyed the conversation. Our decision this year really comes down to one question, which is, are you happy with how our neighborhoods have been changing over these last 20 years? If you think our rise in homelessness, storefront vacancies, and cost of living is acceptable, then by all means, continue to vote for the same leadership. But if not, if you're like me and you believe that San Francisco can do so much better, then know that as your next District 3 supervisor, I will be your partner every step of the way to bring forward-looking ideas to our neighborhoods, like making it easier to open small businesses, doing more to clean up our streets, and building more affordable housing. Thank you so much. I hope to earn your support by November 3rd, and please reach out anytime. You can reach us at our website, dannyd3.com. Thank you all.
Spencer?
Yep, I just want to thank you, Tricia, as well as all the neighborhood organizations that helped put this on. I've also had a very great experience here tonight talking with you all and getting everything out there. You know, again, I'll follow up on what Danny said here. As far as if people are happy with what they're seeing in their neighborhoods right now, if they're happy with the homeless crisis that we're having, if they're happy with over 400 individuals dying on our streets in 2019, then by all means vote for Aaron Peskin. If you're not happy with that, if you want to see a change, if you want to see new ideas, and if you want to see an extreme focus on outcomes, then I would love to have your vote this November. I think my background shows that I've been focused on a lot of these things, and I've actually gotten results for thousands, tens of thousands, and millions of individuals in our communities.
Thank you. Nick, do you want to unmute yourself and close us out?
All right. Hey, everyone. Well, look, on behalf of the audience, candidates, and all the sponsoring organizations, thank you, Tricia. Thank you for guiding this insightful debate. I think you did us all a great service. And thank you to everyone for attending. Vote November 3rd. You can vote early. Just make sure you vote, guys. Have a great night, everyone.